He swore the baby wasn't his. Until 3 years later, he saw a little girl with his exact eyes in her arms, and everything unraveled. Michael Harding had always lived by one rule: control everything, feel nothing. As the CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the United States, he didn't believe in distractions, vulnerability, or anything that couldn't be measured, scaled, or predicted. He had built his empire brick by brutal brick, rising from a middle-class background to billionaire status before he was 40. His hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, his eyes a cold analytical blue, and his presence in any room was enough to silence conversations. People respected him. People feared him. No one got too close. Except for Sarah. Sarah Martin was the only person who had ever slipped through the cracks in Michael's walls. They had met 5 years earlier at a conference in San Diego. She wasn't part of his world. She wasn't a CEO or a strategist or a tech investor. She worked in sustainability of all things, and had come to speak about eco-conscious supply chains. What started as a one-time conversation over coffee turned into a quiet kind of relationship, one with no contracts, no press, no declarations. Just two people meeting in the quiet margins of their lives. Sarah had long dark brown hair, thoughtful brown eyes, and the kind of grounded calm that made Michael's storming mind slow down, just a little. She never asked for more than he gave, but she saw him, really saw him, and for a while, that terrified and thrilled him all at once. But when Sarah told him she was pregnant, everything shifted. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening in New York. They were sitting in his penthouse apartment, the city spread out like circuitry below them, the air full of the low hum of jazz. She held a cup of tea in both hands, her fingers visibly shaking, and then she said it. Gently, almost apologetically. "I'm pregnant, Michael." He didn't say anything for a full 30 seconds. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out into the darkness. "You're sure?" he asked flatly. "Yes." Another long silence. Then, coldly, "And you think it's mine?" That question was like a blade across the room. Sarah set down her tea, her expression still calm, but her eyes now glassy with disbelief. "Think? Michael, we've been together for nearly a year, you know I wouldn't lie to you." But he didn't respond with comfort or apology. He was already calculating risk, exposure, complication. He saw headlines, lawsuits, leverage lost. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Panic. His voice sharpened. "I can't have this in my life right now. You know what's at stake." Sarah stared at him as though she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "What's at stake? Michael, this isn't a corporate deal. This is a child, our child." He turned back toward her, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "You're asking me to believe that. But if you've been seeing someone else..." "I haven't," she snapped, finally rising to her feet. "I came to you because I thought you'd want to be part of this. I didn't come for your money, or your protection. I came because I believed there was something real between us." Michael didn't answer. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. And Sarah, heart pounding in her chest, understood that nothing she said would matter. He had already chosen to retreat, to reject, to protect himself, rather than trust her. He didn't cry when she left. She packed her things that night, refusing the car he offered to send, and took a cab back to her small apartment on the other side of the city. The next morning, she quit her job, closed her lease, and moved to upstate New York with her daughter from a previous marriage, 7-year-old Emily. She left behind the city, the corporate chaos, and the man she had once let into her life. Michael never reached out. Not when the due date came and went. Not when the baby Sophie was born with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored his exactly. Not when Sarah sent him a brief message with a photo, just once, a quiet olive branch, which he ignored. For Michael, denial was easier than doubt. He buried himself in work, surrounded himself with strategic partners, and told himself that if it really was his child, she would come back again and prove it. She didn't. She disappeared entirely. And for the next 3 years, he lived his life as if nothing had ever happened. As if Sarah had been a passing distraction. As if Sophie didn't exist. But all the denial in the world couldn't prepare him for what was coming. Sarah Martin didn't break down the night she left Michael's apartment, though her body wanted to. Instead, she held herself together with the kind of quiet determination that only comes from deep disappointment. She focused on packing her belongings and keeping Emily calm, repeating soft reassurances that things would be okay, even though she didn't quite believe them herself. When the cab pulled away from the glittering skyline of Manhattan and carried them north into the colder, quieter stretch of New York State, Sarah stared out the window, holding her hand over her belly, and silently promised the child inside her that she would be loved, even if not by both parents. They settled in a modest rental house in a small town that had fewer lights and less noise. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. Sarah found a part-time job in a local herbal shop and worked late into the night researching how to create natural skincare products from home. Her pregnancy progressed quickly, and with each passing week she grew more confident, not in the future, that still terrified her, but in her ability to protect her children. Emily, though quiet at first, adapted quickly. She didn't ask about Michael, only noticed that her mother seemed tired more often and sometimes cried in the shower. When Sophie was born on a gray April morning, the room fell into stunned silence. The nurse, who had never seen Sarah's partner, looked down at the baby and then up at Sarah with surprise. The child was almost ethereal, fluffy blonde hair, bright sky-blue eyes, and skin so fair it glowed under the hospital lights. Sarah, exhausted and overwhelmed, stared at her daughter for a long time before reaching for her. Holding Sophie for the first time, she felt the weight of grief and gratitude at once. Grief for the father who would never know this moment, gratitude for the miracle in her arms. Raising Sophie was not easy. Sarah had no family close by and very few friends. Most days were spent balancing clients, inventory, nursing, and trying to give Emily the attention she deserved. But slowly, life found a rhythm. The business took root, first through local fairs and then online orders. Word of mouth spread. Her products, handcrafted, beautifully packaged and made with care, started gaining recognition beyond their small town. By the time Sophie was 2, Sarah had opened her own storefront. It wasn't big, but it was hers. Sophie grew into a curious, radiant little girl. She had an unusual gentleness for her age, but also flashes of defiance, especially when she felt something was unfair. People often commented on how much she looked like her father, always assuming Sarah's late husband had been blonde. Sarah never corrected them. Instead, she learned to smile politely and redirect the conversation, but every time someone said, "She looks just like her daddy," a silent ache pressed behind her ribs. Emily, on the other hand, had a quiet strength beyond her years. She loved Sophie deeply, and often took on the role of protector without being asked. She had seen her mother cry in the early days, and had made an unspoken vow to be her support. Though still young, Emily was deeply perceptive. She knew enough to understand that her sister had a different father, and that the father had chosen not to be around. She didn't forgive him for it, even if she didn't say so out loud. Despite everything, there was joy in their home. The three of them would dance barefoot in the living room, cook messy breakfasts on Sundays, and build blanket forts during thunderstorms. Sarah read stories to them every night, even when she was exhausted. She kept her business afloat while never letting either of her daughters feel second to her work. There was no bitterness in her parenting, only fierce love and a quiet resolve. Still, some nights, when the house was dark and both girls were asleep, Sarah would sit by the window with a cup of tea and allow herself to remember. She'd remember the way Michael's voice would soften just slightly when he was tired, or the way he used to rest his hand on the small of her back, without thinking. She remembered how, in brief, rare moments, she thought he might really be hers, and then she'd remember his face the night she told him she was pregnant. The sudden shift from man to machine. And the chill that had stayed with her since. She didn't regret walking away, she regretted believing he might choose differently. But time had passed. Her daughters were happy, the shop was growing, and she had learned that survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about creating a life where joy could still grow in the cracks left by disappointment. She didn't know that Michael had returned to New York. She didn't know he was now expanding his business into the northern markets. She didn't know that fate, after 3 years of silence, had begun to move its pieces again. But Sophie would change everything. And this time, Sarah wouldn't be the one knocking on anyone's door. The morning started like any other. Michael Harding stepped out of his black town car, crisp suit immaculate, silver watch glinting against the sleeve of his tailored jacket. The air was brisk and fresh, and the small town he had arrived in was quieter than he was used to. His executive assistant trailed behind him, reading off details about the new acquisition. The final piece of a regional expansion that would allow Harding Biotech to reach deeper into suburban healthcare markets. For Michael, this was just another city on a map, another opportunity to grow, to dominate. He had no emotional attachment to geography. Cities were chessboards, people were either useful or forgettable. The meeting with the regional clinic's board was scheduled in a renovated building, across from a line of local shops. While his team set up inside, Michael stepped out to take a brief call. He disliked sitting idle, even for 10 minutes. As he moved toward the sidewalk, his eyes drifted lazily across the street. He was about to turn back when something, or rather someone, caught his attention. As woman was stepping out of a boutique flower shop, a little girl in her arms. They weren't facing him at first, but even from the distance, something about them tugged at his attention. The woman's long brown hair was loosely tied back. She wore a simple coat, and her posture had the effortless grace of someone unself-conscious. The little girl had her arms wrapped tightly around the woman's neck, chattering about something, pointing toward a balloon in a nearby window. Michael squinted slightly, curiosity stirring. Then the woman turned. The world didn't just slow, it stopped. Sarah? There was no mistaking her, though her hair was a bit longer and there was something different about her. Something more grounded, more assured. It was Sarah. She hadn't seen him yet, too busy adjusting the child on her hip. But Michael couldn't move. He stared, frozen on the sidewalk, as if the wind had been knocked from his chest. And the little girl. Blonde hair, wild and soft like down. Eyes bright blue. Unmistakably blue. His blue. She looked no more than 3, maybe a little older. Her features were delicate, innocent. But as Michael's mind raced, he saw it all. The shape of her chin, the slight tilt of her nose, even the way she pointed. Decisive, like she knew what she wanted. Every detail hit him like a brick. She looked exactly like him. Not just similar. Not maybe. Not could be. She was him. Sarah finally looked up as they crossed the street, her smile fading the instant her eyes met his. For a moment, time stood still between them. Her steps faltered only slightly, and in that pause a dozen emotions crossed her face. Shock, anger, hesitation, maybe even fear. But no surprise. It was as if she'd always known this moment might come. Michael, for once, didn't know what to do. He wasn't prepared for this. He had imagined from time to time what it might feel like if Sarah ever returned, if she ever tried to re-enter his life, with a child in tow. But in those versions, he held the power. He made the rules. This was different. He hadn't found her because he sought her out. He had simply stumbled upon a truth that refused to stay buried. Sarah didn't stop. She adjusted her grip on the child and walked past him with steady, purposeful steps. She didn't say a word. The girl glanced over Sarah's shoulder as they passed, her eyes meeting his for the briefest second before she tucked her face against her mother's shoulder. Michael's feet remained planted, his breath uneven. It felt like the edges of his carefully composed world were starting to fray. He didn't return to the meeting right away. When his assistant found him still standing on the corner minutes later, she asked if everything was all right. He nodded stiffly, dismissing her concern. But inside, a storm had begun to rise. Slow, quiet, but undeniable. Later that night, alone in his hotel suite, he sat in front of the large windows overlooking the town. He hadn't turned on the lights. The shadows of passing cars flickered across the ceiling. In his hand was a glass of scotch, untouched. His mind ran in circles. He remembered the last conversation with Sarah, the one that ended with silence, with distance, with her walking away. He remembered dismissing her claim, brushing it off as manipulation, as emotion clouding reason. He had believed he was protecting himself, his reputation, his empire. But now, faced with the living proof of his denial, he felt like a coward. For the first time in years, shame burned through him. And still, he didn't know what to do. He didn't even know if she would speak to him. But one thing was certain. That little girl, his daughter, existed. She breathed, she laughed. She pointed and clung to her mother and blinked up at him with his eyes. And Michael Harding, a man who had once refused to believe he could be anyone's father, realized with a slow, aching clarity that he had already missed the first 3 years of her life. He didn't know her name. And it was killing him. Michael didn't sleep that night. He paced the length of the hotel suite like a man possessed, 1,000 thoughts colliding in his head without any exit. Logic, his lifelong ally, had abandoned him. All the strategies, models, and structures he relied on to make decisions in business were useless now. There was no spreadsheet that could calculate how to face a woman you'd abandoned and the child you'd denied. At some point near dawn he made a decision. Not a plan, not a strategy, but something deeper, something human. He needed to speak to Sarah, not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. He needed to look her in the eye. By late morning he had tracked down the flower shop she had exited the day before. It wasn't hard. The town was small and his name still carried enough weight for people to answer questions when asked, but when he arrived he hesitated outside the glass door. Through the window he saw her arranging small bouquets, her hair pulled back into a low ponytail. Her movements calm, deliberate, almost meditative. She didn't look up when the doorbell chimed as he stepped inside. The shop smelled like lavender and mint. It was cozy, lined with small shelves of handmade soaps, candles, and neatly labeled jars of dried herbs. It felt nothing like the corporate world he came from. It felt real. When she finally looked up and saw him, her entire body tensed, though she didn't speak. She simply set down the scissors in her hand and folded her arms across her chest. "I didn't come to cause a scene," Michael said quietly. "Then you probably shouldn't be here," Sarah replied, her voice steady but brittle. He swallowed hard. "I saw you yesterday." "I saw her?" Sarah nodded once, unsurprised. "I figured you would." He took a tentative step closer, but respected the invisible boundary between them. "She looks exactly like me." "She does," Sarah said, her tone clipped. "And that's been my daily reality for the past 3 years." Michael exhaled, frustrated with himself. "I didn't know what to do back then. I panicked." "You didn't panic, Michael. You chose. You made a decision and stuck to it. That's what you do. You calculate. You cut what doesn't fit." Her words hit like blunt force. He had always appreciated Sarah's honesty, but now, it burned. "I was wrong," he said simply. "That's the understatement of the century," she said, turning her back to him and beginning to gather flowers again. "You didn't just walk away from me. You walked away from her. You didn't even want to know. You don't get to fix that with an apology." Michael stood in silence, watching her hands move, quick and precise, tying ribbons with the kind of grace that only comes from routine repetition. He realized this was the part of her life he had never been allowed to see. The strength she carried alone. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said after a long pause, "but I need to be honest with you. When I saw her, something in me, everything in me, shifted. I didn't just see a child, I saw a part of myself I never knew existed." Sarah turned back to face him, a tired anger still lingering in her expression. "And what exactly do you want now, Michael? To swoop in and be a father? Take her to brunch on Sundays and feel good about yourself again? This isn't a redemption arc for you." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I don't want to feel good. I want to feel responsible. I want to earn whatever I still can. I want to know her name." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. She could see that he wasn't putting on a performance. There was no charm, no polished mask. He looked exhausted. And he looked like he meant it. "Sophie," she said at last. "Her name is Sophie." He closed his eyes briefly, letting the word settle into his chest like a prayer. "That's beautiful." "She's beautiful," Sarah said, her voice breaking for the first time. And smart. And stubborn. She sings when she's tired, and she loves blueberries more than anything else. She thinks your face is on money. I told her it's not, but she insists. Michael let out a quiet laugh, not because it was funny, but because he didn't know how else to hold the emotions threatening to overflow. Can I see her? He asked gently. Not now, not today, just sometime. Sarah looked torn. She wrapped her arms around herself like she needed protection from the question. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend this didn't damage us. I've raised her alone. Emily has raised her. You're a stranger, Michael. And strangers don't just visit their children like it's a business pitch. I know, he said. But I want to become something more than that. And I'm willing to take the time. However long it takes. Sarah didn't answer. The bell above the door rang again, and a customer entered. She stepped away to help them, her posture turning professional and polite. Michael understood. The conversation was over. For now. He left the shop quietly, the scent of mint and lavender clinging to his coat, the sound of Sophie's name still echoing in his ears. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in years, he wasn't walking away. Michael returned to the city with a restlessness he couldn't shake. The meetings he once dominated now felt hollow, like echo chambers full of scripted nods and mechanical decisions. His board members noticed the change in him, though no one dared mention it directly. He spoke less, listened more, and sometimes drifted off in meetings with his eyes fixed on something far beyond the glass walls of the corporate tower. His world, once carved with precision and devoid of emotion, had cracked open, and something entirely new was seeping through. Back in his penthouse, the silence became unbearable. The minimalism he once took pride in, sleek furniture, cold lighting, spotless surfaces, suddenly felt sterile, like a showroom without a soul. He found himself pulling out old files and photos he hadn't looked at in years. Somewhere at the bottom of a drawer, he found the single ultrasound image Sarah had once emailed him. He had never opened it. It was still sealed, unread, untouched. With trembling fingers he peeled it open. The image was grainy, dated, and small, but it felt monumental now. A heartbeat captured in grayscale, dismissed by a man too proud and afraid to see what was in front of him. He sat on the floor of his office with the photo in his lap for what felt like hours. The next morning he took action, but not in the way he used to. There was no announcement, no press release, no flashy demonstration of power. He simply called his assistant and cleared his calendar. He told the board he would be working remotely for an extended period, citing personal matters with a finality that left no room for debate. Then he drove back to that small town and checked into a modest inn near the center of town. The kind with mismatched bedspreads and creaky floors. It wasn't comfort he was after, it was presence. He didn't try to see Sarah immediately. He didn't want to force anything. Instead, he walked the streets, learned the rhythm of the town, and visited the shops without hiding his face. People whispered, of course. His name still carried weight, but no one approached him directly. He visited the local bookstore and bought a stack of children's books, carefully choosing titles he thought a curious 3-year-old might enjoy. He had no idea if Sophie liked to read, but he wanted to be prepared if the opportunity ever came. Days passed, and Sarah remained silent. He didn't blame her. He had burned every bridge between them. But then one afternoon, as he walked past her flower shop, the door opened, and Emily stepped out. She was older now, sharper in the eyes than he remembered from years ago, with the same chestnut hair as her mother, and a guarded expression that made it clear she had not forgotten anything. She looked at him without fear or politeness. Just a calm challenge in her gaze. "You're following us," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "No," Michael replied softly. "I'm waiting." She considered that for a moment, then added, "Sophie likes mermaids, and honey on toast, just so you know." He almost smiled. "Thank you." Emily didn't smile back. "If you hurt them again, I'll make sure you regret it." And with that she turned and walked down the street like a soldier on patrol. Michael didn't stop watching until she disappeared around the corner. that evening he received a message from Sarah. Short, direct, and without emotion. "Come by tomorrow at 4. She'll be home." The next day, he stood on the porch of Sarah's home, heart pounding harder than it had in any boardroom or investor pitch. When the door opened, it was Sophie who appeared, wearing a mismatched outfit covered in glitter stickers and holding a juice box in one hand. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and for a long moment, she simply stared. Then, to his shock, she grinned. "You're the guy from the flower shop," she said, pointing at him. "The one who looks like my mirror?" Michael knelt down, unable to stop the tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I do." Sarah stood quietly behind her, arms folded, expression unreadable. She didn't say anything, but she didn't close the door either. Michael spent the next hour sitting on the living room rug, listening to Sophie tell him about her toys, her favorite breakfast, and the story she made up about a unicorn who lived on the moon. She asked him silly questions, poked at his watch, and called him Mr. Fancy Shoes. Sarah watched from the kitchen, saying little, but her silence no longer felt hostile. It felt cautious. Protective. When Sophie ran off to show Emily her crayon drawing, Sarah finally walked over. Her voice was low, almost tired. "She doesn't know who you are, not really. Just that you're someone I used to know." Michael nodded. "I'd like to change that. Slowly. With your permission." Sarah hesitated, then said, "We'll see. For now she thinks you're just someone who listens to her. That's already more than most." That night as he left, Sophie waved from the window, pressing her tiny hand against the glass. He touched the other side, quietly stunned by the power of such a small gesture. For the first time in his life, Michael Harding understood what it meant to feel humbled. Not by failure, not by defeat, but by the chance to become something he had never dared to be, needed. Michael began visiting Sarah and the girls regularly after that first quiet hour on the living room rug. At first it was only once a week, always prearranged, always with clear boundaries. He would come in the late afternoons, often bringing books or puzzles for Sophie and small gifts for Emily. Not extravagant things but thoughtful gestures, like a notebook with pressed flowers, or a small pendant that resembled a moonstone. He made sure nothing he brought looked like a bribe. It wasn't about buying affection, it was about showing up, being consistent, and proving through action that he was staying. At first, Sophie treated him like a favorite guest, someone exciting, someone who paid attention and always had time for her rambling stories. She'd sit on his lap and explain the secret languages of her dolls, or pull him into elaborate games where she was a princess and he was the knight who wasn't very good at following instructions. Her trust came quickly, almost too quickly, and Michael found that both heartwarming and terrifying. He knew what it meant to fail in business. He'd survived lawsuits, betrayals, market crashes. But the idea of failing this small, trusting person left him breathless. Emily, on the other hand, remained guarded. She would sit in the room when he visited, but rarely speak to him directly. She watched. Always watched. Sometimes she'd interject, if she thought he was being too eager, or if Sophie asked something that Sarah hadn't planned on answering. One afternoon, when Sophie had asked why Michael didn't live with them, Emily cut in sharply with, "Because he left. That's why." Michael had opened his mouth to reply, but Sarah had raised her hand. "Not now," she said, not unkindly but firmly. The moment passed, but the weight of it remained in the air long after. Still, the rhythm of connection began to settle into place. Sarah never let her guard down completely, but her walls weren't made of steel anymore. They were made of caution, of learned strength, of a woman who had survived abandonment and refused to let anyone near her daughters unless they earned their place. And slowly, Michael was earning it. Not through apologies. He didn't try to repeat those anymore, but through quiet effort. Then, without warning, the fragile peace was disrupted. It started with a phone call. Sarah had just closed the shop for the day when her phone rang, and the number made her chest tighten. It was her ex-husband, Emily's biological father. They hadn't spoken in over 2 years. He had no custody, no interest, and had vanished the moment child support enforcement caught up with him. But now he was back, and suddenly, he wanted to talk. Sarah didn't trust the sudden change. She listened to his voice, smooth, charming, unnervingly pleasant, and her stomach turned. He asked about Emily, then asked if he could visit. When Sarah said she'd think about it, he responded with a veiled threat. "You wouldn't want the courts involved, would you? You're letting that Harding guy hang around your daughters like he's one of them. Pretty sure that's not legal." She hung up without replying, heart pounding. When she told Michael about the call later that week, he listened without interrupting. Then he stood up and walked to the window, jaw clenched. "He's using me as leverage," he said finally, "to stir doubt, to assert control." "Bill always did know where to strike," Sarah murmured, rubbing her temples. "He doesn't want Emily. He wants power, attention. And he sees me happy, stable. He hates that." Michael turned back to face her. "Let me help. Let me hire someone, a lawyer, a mediator, whatever you need." "I can't let you fix this for me," she said, "not out of pride, but out of principle. But, if he tries to take Emily, I won't be able to fight him alone," Michael said, and his voice was unlike she had ever heard it before. Calm but cold, laced with something dangerous and deeply protective. A week later the paperwork arrived. A formal custody challenge. Her ex was trying to petition for joint custody of Emily, alleging that Sarah's relationship with Michael created an unstable environment. The implication was subtle but clear. Sarah was exposing Emily to a man with no legal ties to her, and possibly manipulating both children. The idea enraged Michael more than he could express. He had never laid claim to Emily. He had never overstepped. But now, to be weaponized like this, used as a legal threat against the woman and children he was just beginning to know? It made his blood boil. Sarah tried to stay calm for Emily and Sophie, but the stress showed. Her posture stiffened, her laugh became less frequent. She no longer lingered in conversations. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, she broke down in the kitchen, while Michael stood silently, letting her cry without trying to stop it. When she finally looked up, red-eyed and exhausted, she whispered, "I'm so tired of being alone in every fight." "You're not alone anymore," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "Not in this." They hired a lawyer together. Michael funded everything, without condition. He stayed out of the legal strategy, but provided every document, every witness, every character statement needed. He even agreed, on Sarah's terms, to a DNA test to formally confirm that Sophie was his daughter, so no one could ever use the ambiguity against them again. The day Emily's testimony was requested, Sarah was sick with nerves. She tried to talk her daughter out of it, fearing it would scar her, but Emily insisted. In the courtroom, dressed in a simple navy dress and holding her head high, Emily stood before the judge and spoke clearly. "I want to stay with my mom. I want to live with my sister. And I want Mr. Harding to stay in our lives. Because he listens. He shows up. My real dad doesn't." There was silence, even the judge had to pause. That statement, those 3 sentences, broke the entire case. Her biological father lost all ground. The court ruled in Sarah's favor, without hesitation. When they returned home that evening, the girls ran ahead into the house, laughing and shrieking with joy. Sarah stood on the porch with Michael, the late afternoon light stretching long across the grass. She looked at him for a long time. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I never should have left in the first place," he replied. And for the first time, Sarah didn't look away. In the weeks that followed the custody hearing, something in the atmosphere around Sarah's home began to shift. The tightness in her shoulders, the cautious way she used to glance at the front door as if expecting another knock from her past, slowly faded. There was no more legal paperwork sliding through the mail slot. No more veiled threats hidden behind falsely polite phone calls. For the first time in a very long time, her world felt safe. But it was more than just the end of a legal battle. It was the beginning of something she hadn't dared imagine: stability with Michael. Michael had not only helped her navigate the storm, but he had done it without ego. He never used his support as leverage. He never reminded her of what he'd done or what it had cost him. He was just there, quietly, firmly, always there. He drove Sophie to the library on Saturday mornings. He helped Emily build a birdhouse for a school project, even though neither of them could figure out which way the roof should face. He began joining them for dinner once or twice a week, and eventually, Sarah stopped feeling like she had to watch his every move. One evening in early spring, after the girls had gone to bed, Michael stayed behind to help Sarah clean up. They moved in sync now, passing dishes and wiping counters with a rhythm that didn't need instructions. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, it was familiar, like a shared language spoken without words. When the kitchen was done, they stepped outside onto the small porch. The air still crisp, but no longer sharp. The sky above was full of stars, and Sarah leaned on the wooden railing, looking up. "I used to come out here when things got hard," she said quietly. "Back when Sophie was a baby? I'd stand right here and just breathe. Try to believe that things wouldn't always be so heavy." Michael looked at her, studying the lines on her face that weren't there 3 years ago. "And now?" "Now," she said, glancing at him with a small, almost shy smile. "Sometimes I forget what the heaviness felt like." He stepped closer, not quite touching her, but close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder near his. "I wish I'd been here for all of it. The hard parts. The little parts. That's what the stories are." "I don't," she said, surprising him. "If you had come back before you were ready, I think you would have just hurt us all over again. But now, you're different. You're slower, softer. You listen more." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You changed me. They changed me." "You changed yourself," she said, more firmly. "We just gave you a reason." They stood like that for a long time, the porch quiet except for the distant chirp of frogs and the rustling of trees. At some point, without thinking, Sarah reached for his hand. He didn't speak or move. He just let their fingers intertwine naturally, as if they had always belonged that way. From that night on, things between them weren't spoken out loud. There was no grand conversation about what they were or what they were becoming, but the energy had changed. The way she looked at him shifted. The way he entered the house, no longer knocking, just coming in with groceries or a new book for Sophie, felt like a man who wasn't visiting anymore, but returning. There was no pressure for labels, no race to call it something, but the closeness deepened. The family rhythms expanded to include him, and not because he demanded it, but because the space had been made for him naturally. Then came Sophie's birthday. She was turning 4 and Sarah had planned a small backyard party with homemade decorations, and a chocolate cake topped with blueberries. Michael offered to handle the invitations, and to Sarah's surprise, he followed through with care and precision. He called every parent himself, even arranged for a local puppet show Sophie had seen in town and loved. On the day of the party, the yard filled with balloons, laughter, and children chasing each other through the grass. Sophie wore a crown made of paper and glitter, and Emily ran the music playlist from a speaker she'd set up herself. At one point, Michael lifted Sophie into his arms so she could blow out her candles. She looked at him with those same unmistakable blue eyes and said, loudly and clearly, "You're my best present." The moment silenced the crowd. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held the cake knife. Michael looked up, stunned, caught between pride and the sudden intensity of emotion that stole the air from his lungs. Then, with childlike certainty, Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered something only he could hear. He didn't share what she said. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the girls were asleep, Michael and Sarah sat on the porch again, wrapped in a shared blanket this time. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed. "She knows," he said quietly. "She's known for a while," Sarah replied. "She just waited for the right time." Michael stared out at the moonlit grass, feeling an overwhelming calm settle into his chest. "I think I did too." Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. In that silence, everything was understood. Summer arrived with quiet certainty. The once cool mornings had warmed, and the air was filled with the scent of cut grass, blooming gardens, and something else. Something softer, less tangible. Peace. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gradual unfolding, like petals slowly opening to the sun. Michael, Sarah, Emily, and Sophie had found a rhythm together, not forced or defined by rules, but built from daily trust. What had once been tentative visits turned into shared routines. Michael began spending most weekends at the house, and then some weekdays too. He still kept his business running, but he delegated more, traveled less, and built a life that wasn't about escaping into work, but staying present for what mattered. Sarah no longer flinched at surprise phone calls or unexpected knocks at the door. Emily no longer watched Michael with suspicion. In fact, she started making him coffee the way he liked it, black with a dash of cinnamon, and left books on the kitchen table she thought he'd enjoy. Sophie began introducing him to strangers not as "Mommy's friend," but simply as "my daddy." The first time she said it without being prompted, Michael had to step outside for air. He stood in the backyard staring at the sky, one hand on his chest, as if he were holding his heart together. They didn't plan a proposal. There wasn't a ring or a grand gesture or a viral video-worthy moment. One night in late July, after the girls were asleep and the crickets had begun their familiar hum outside the window, Michael sat with Sarah on the living room couch, her legs tucked beneath her, a book resting face down in her lap. They were talking about something small. Chores, grocery lists, Emily's next school project. When he simply said, "Do you think we could make this permanent?" She looked at him, blinking once, then again. "We already have," she said. "But if you're asking me what I think you're asking me, then yes." And that was it. No nerves, no drama, just a quiet understanding between two people who had already lived through the fire and come out on the other side. The wedding was small, held in the garden behind Sarah's house, the same garden where Sophie had learned to walk, where Michael had first read to her, where Emily had once watched him from behind a tree with narrowed, cautious eyes. Only close friends and a few neighbors were invited. There was no press, no photographers, no designer gowns or choreographed dances. Sarah wore a soft ivory dress that she'd chosen for its comfort, not its sparkle. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, a flower tucked behind her ear. Michael wore a light gray suit, no tie, his hands shaking slightly when he buttoned the cuffs that morning. Emily stood beside Sarah, holding her bouquet steady and proud. Sophie ran ahead of the ceremony in bare feet, wearing a crown of daisies, giggling so loudly that even the officiant laughed. When it came time for vows, Michael didn't read from paper. He simply looked into Sarah's eyes and said, "I once thought love was weakness. Then I lost you. And now I know, love is the only strength that lasts." Sarah didn't cry until later, when Emily stepped forward and, without being asked, read a short letter she had written. In it, she wrote about what family meant, and how sometimes people leave, but the ones who come back and stay, really stay, are the ones who matter the most. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. After the ceremony, they sat on picnic blankets under strings of warm lights, eating homemade food and drinking lemonade. There was music playing from a speaker in the window, and Sophie danced in circles until she collapsed in the grass, laughing and breathless. That night, when the house was quiet again and the guests had gone, Michael tucked Sophie into bed. She was too sleepy to speak, but she reached for his hand, and didn't let go. In the next room, Emily had left a small note on his pillow. It read, "You didn't just marry her, you married us." Michael stood in the hallway for a long time, the note in his hand, the sound of two girls breathing softly behind their doors. Then he walked to the kitchen, where Sarah was washing the last of the dishes, still barefoot, her dress wrinkled from dancing, her smile soft. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his forehead against her shoulder. "I didn't know life could feel like this." Sarah turned in his arms and looked up at him. "You just had to choose it." Outside, the stars hung bright in the sky, and in that small house filled with the echoes of old pain and new beginnings, a family exhaled, together, knowing that the hardest chapters were behind them, and the best ones were still being written.
A black girl with rainbow-colored hair walks down the street. People turn their heads, some smile, while others whisper behind her back. But behind her bright appearance lies an incredible story, one of courage, battling judgment, and the desire to be herself. Her hair became her shout to the world, "I am unique, and this is my power." But what did she have to go through to gain recognition? Now, it's your turn. How would you express your individuality? Share in the comments what inspires you to be yourself. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Hit the like button and share this video, it might just inspire someone around you. The idea had been growing in her mind for weeks, maybe even months. Maya, shy, reserved, and used to blending into the background, had always felt like an outsider in her small town. There was something about the monotony of her daily life that gnawed at her spirit. Every street looked the same, every day bled into the next, and the unspoken rules of conformity seemed to suffocate her. She wanted more. She needed more. One day, as she scrolled through her phone, her eyes landed on an image that stopped her cold, a model with bold, rainbow-colored hair, standing confidently in a field of gray. The image sparked something in her, a vision of who she could be. Maya's heart raced. Could she pull off something so daring? Would she dare? That night, lying in her room, she stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning with possibilities. Rainbow hair. It wasn't just about looking different, it was about feeling different. It was a declaration to the world, and to herself, that she was done hiding. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. Maya wanted her outside to match the vibrancy she felt deep down inside, the part of her she was tired of suppressing. The next morning, she woke up with a clarity that startled her. This wasn't just a whim, it was a decision. Maya didn't tell anyone about her plan. Not her parents, who she knew would disapprove. Not her friends, who might think it was a joke. This was her moment, her choice. Walking into the tiny, one-chair salon on the outskirts of town, Maya felt her stomach twist with nerves. The hairstylist, a middle-aged woman with streaks of purple in her own hair, looked at her with curiosity. "What can I do for you, sweetie?" the woman asked, her warm tone putting Maya slightly at ease. Maya hesitated for only a moment before pulling out her phone and showing the picture that had inspired her. "I want this," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The stylist's eyebrows shot up, and then a slow smile spread across her face. "Now that's bold. You sure?" Maya nodded. "I'm sure." As the stylist began her work, Maya felt a strange mix of fear and excitement bubbling inside her. The sound of foil crinkling, the smell of dye, it was all so unfamiliar yet exhilarating. She could feel the weight of every strand of her hair being transformed, as if pieces of her old self were being replaced with something brighter, bolder. When the process was finally done, Maya stared at herself in the mirror. Her breath caught in her throat. The colors shimmered in the light, vibrant streaks of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet cascading down her shoulders. It wasn't just hair. It was art. It was freedom. But more than that, it was her. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she was truly seeing herself, not the quiet, ordinary girl everyone thought they knew, but someone fierce, colorful, and unapologetically alive. Maya left the salon that day with her head held high, the colors in her hair catching the sunlight as she walked down the street. She didn't know what reactions awaited her, and honestly, she didn't care. For the first time, Maya wasn't afraid to stand out. This was her first step toward brightness. Maya stepped out of the salon, the door's small bell jingling softly behind her. The cool air brushed against her skin, and she hesitated for a moment, adjusting the strap of her bag. Her heart raced, not because of the cold, but because this was it, the moment she would show the world her new self. The sun was bright that afternoon, its rays catching the streaks of color in her hair and making them shimmer like a kaleidoscope. She took a deep breath and started walking down Main Street, where people bustled in and out of shops, chatting, laughing, and going about their routines. At first, she kept her head down, eyes focused on the sidewalk. But it didn't take long for her to notice the shift in energy around her. A man in a suit, walking briskly, slowed down as he passed her, his eyebrows arching in surprise. A group of teenagers sitting outside a cafe nudged each other and pointed, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. An older woman carrying a shopping bag stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing as she muttered something under her breath. Maya's chest tightened. She could feel the stares, like invisible beams of heat pressing against her. She glanced at her reflection in a storefront window and saw herself glowing, radiant and bold against the muted backdrop of the town. But the reflection also revealed the expressions of those behind her, a mix of curiosity, disapproval, and even amusement. "Wow, look at her hair," a little girl exclaimed, tugging on her mother's sleeve. The child's face lit up with awe, but her mother quickly shushed her, pulling her along without a second glance at Maya. It was as though she had stepped into a spotlight, one she hadn't asked for but now couldn't escape. Each step felt heavier than the last as whispers followed her like a trail. "She looks like a clown," someone murmured loud enough for her to hear. "It's kind of cool, though," another voice said, softer but not unnoticed. Maya kept walking, her face carefully neutral. She tried to focus on the positives, the way the sunlight made her hair look like a living rainbow, the genuine admiration in the eyes of the little girl. But the weight of judgment bore down on her, and her earlier confidence began to waver. At the crosswalk, a young man with earbuds in his ears glanced at her, gave a quick thumbs up, and kept moving. Maya felt a small spark of relief. Not everyone disapproved. There were people who appreciated her boldness, even if they were the minority. But the relief was fleeting. A car honked as it sped by, and someone shouted out the window, "Nice hair, freak." Her stomach dropped, and she instinctively hunched her shoulders. By the time she reached the park, her pulse was pounding, and her palms were damp. She sat on a bench, trying to collect herself. The wind ruffled her hair, and she caught the faint scent of the dye, a reminder of the choice she had made. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She replayed the comments and the stares in her mind, her emotions swirling. There had been moments of awe, moments of disdain, and moments of outright hostility. But through it all, one thing became clear: she was being seen. For better or worse, she had made an impression. As she opened her eyes, she noticed a young girl sitting a few benches away, watching her intently. The girl smiled shyly and waved before turning back to her book. It was such a small, simple gesture, but it brought a warmth to Maya's chest. Not everyone would understand her choice. Some would judge, and others would even hate. But there would also be those who saw her for who she truly was, someone unafraid to color her world in her own way. With a renewed sense of purpose, Maya stood up and brushed off her jeans. She wasn't just walking down the street anymore. She was making a statement, even if it meant facing the world's mixed reactions. And for the first time, she realized, standing out wasn't just scary, it was powerful. The moment Maya stepped through the school gates, she felt it, a charged silence that was louder than any chatter. It wasn't unusual for her to go unnoticed in the chaotic shuffle of students heading to class. But today was different. Today, all eyes were on her. The first murmur came from a group of students by the lockers. "Is that Maya?" one girl whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Another leaned in, her eyes wide. "Since when does she do stuff like that?" Maya tightened her grip on the straps of her backpack, her colorful hair cascading over her shoulders like a beacon. She tried to walk with purpose, her chin slightly raised, but her steps felt heavier with every corridor she passed. As she approached her locker, the whispers became harder to ignore. "She's got guts, I'll give her that," a boy said, leaning against the wall with a smirk. "Guts?" "More like a craving for attention," his friend replied, laughing. Maya's fingers trembled as she spun the combination lock. She wanted to fire back, to say something that would wipe the smug grins off their faces, but her mind was blank. Instead, she focused on her breathing, her locker door becoming a makeshift shield. The first real interaction came in first period history. As she slipped into her seat near the back, her teacher, Mr. Holden, paused mid-sentence. His eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, his confusion barely masked. "Well, Maya," he said, clearing his throat, "I see you've, made some changes." The class erupted into stifled giggles, and Maya's cheeks burned. She forced a tight smile and nodded, hoping he'd move on. But the damage was done. The room was abuzz with murmurs, heads craning to get a better look at her. Throughout the day, her new look continued to draw attention. In chemistry, her lab partner, a quiet girl named Layla, broke the silence with a hesitant compliment. "I think your hair looks amazing," Layla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's, so bold." Maya's heart lifted slightly. "Thanks," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. But for every Layla, there were two others who stared or made snide remarks just loud enough for her to hear. By lunchtime, the cafeteria felt like a minefield. As Maya walked to an empty table, trays clattered and conversations hushed. "Rainbow girls here," someone muttered. "Is this her rebellion phase or something?" another snickered. Maya sat down and unwrapped her sandwich, pretending not to notice the side glances and smirks. She focused on chewing, her appetite dwindling with each bite. The teachers were no better. In math class, Ms. Andrews gave her a pointed look and asked, "Maya, do you think your new style aligns with the school's dress code?" Maya hesitated, unsure how to respond. I think so," she stammered, feeling the eyes of the entire class on her. "Well," Ms. Andrews continued, "let's hope it doesn't become a distraction for others." The comment stung more than Maya expected. She wasn't breaking any rules, yet her choice was being framed as a problem. Despite the challenges, there were glimmers of hope. A group of students from the art club approached her after school, their eyes lit with excitement. "Your hair is amazing," one of them said, holding a sketchbook against her chest. "You look like a walking masterpiece." "Seriously," another chimed in, "you should come to our next meeting. You'd fit right in." Maya smiled, feeling a small flicker of relief. Not everyone thought she was strange or attention-seeking. Some saw her as brave, even inspiring. But as she walked home that day, the weight of the mixed reactions lingered. School had always been a place where she could fade into the background, where she didn't have to stand out. Now, it felt like a stage where every movement, every word, was being scrutinized. Maya knew she'd need to find her footing in this new social reality. Some people would never understand her choice, and that was okay. But she also realized she wasn't alone, there were allies among the noise, and that gave her a spark of hope. This was only the beginning of her journey, a test of how far she was willing to go to be herself. The smell of dinner wafted through the air as Maya hesitated at the front door. She tightened her grip on the doorknob, glancing at her reflection in the glass. Her rainbow-colored hair caught the light, an iridescent glow against the dull backdrop of their porch. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the familiar warmth of home. "Maya, that you?" her mother called from the kitchen. "Yeah, it's me," she replied, her voice steady but soft. She didn't make it 2 steps into the living room before her younger brother, Malik, froze mid-video game. His mouth hung open as he took in her new look. "Whoa! Did you, lose a bet or something?" he blurted, dropping his controller. "Shut up, Malik," Maya shot back, her nerves prickling. Her father, sitting in his recliner with the evening news murmuring in the background, glanced over his newspaper. His eyebrows knitted together in a mix of confusion and disapproval. "What in the world did you do to your hair?" he asked, folding the paper onto his lap. "It's just hair, Dad," Maya replied, trying to keep her tone light. "It's not just hair," her mother said, stepping into the room with a towel slung over her shoulder. She stopped short when she saw Maya, her eyes widening. "Maya, why would you do that?" "It's what I wanted," Maya said, her voice firmer now. "It's not hurting anyone." Her mother sighed, crossing her arms. "It's not about hurting anyone. It's about what people will think." This isn't how we raised you to present yourself. Maya's heart sank. So I'm supposed to worry about what other people think. That's more important than me being happy. Her father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Listen, Maya, we're not saying you can't express yourself, but this is extreme. You're going to make your life harder than it needs to be. And what about college? Her mother added, her tone laced with worry. Do you think schools or employers will take you seriously looking like this? Maya felt a wave of frustration rising. Why does it always have to be about how I look? Why can't it be about who I am or what I can do? Her mother opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, shaking her head. The tension in the room was palpable. Malik, still sitting on the floor, muttered, I think it's kinda cool. You look like a superhero or something. Maya gave him a faint smile, grateful for his awkward attempt at support, but it did little to ease the growing rift between her and her parents. The dinner table that night was quieter than usual. Her father focused on his plate, her mother kept glancing at Maya with a mix of worry and disappointment, and Malik tried to break the silence with unrelated chatter. The real conversation came later, when her mother knocked softly on Maya's bedroom door. Can we talk? She asked, stepping in without waiting for an answer. Maya was sitting cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through her phone. She set it aside and looked up, bracing herself. Her mother sat down at the edge of the bed and sighed. I'm sorry if I came across harsh earlier. It's just, this is a big change. You've always been so quiet, so reserved. I don't understand where this is coming from. Maya hesitated, then said, It's coming from me, Mom. The me I've always been but was too scared to show. I want people to see me for who I am, not just who they expect me to be. Her mother studied her for a long moment. It's not easy, Maya. Being different. People can be cruel. I don't want to see you get hurt. I know, Maya said quietly. But I can't live my life hiding just because some people won't like me. Her mother reached out, smoothing a strand of Maya's rainbow hair. It's beautiful, she admitted reluctantly. I just hope you're ready for everything that comes with standing out. I am, Maya said, her voice steady. I have to be. It took time, but as the days passed, her parents began to see the change in her. She was more confident, more sure of herself than she'd ever been. They didn't always understand her choices, but they started to realize that this wasn't just a phase or a rebellion. It was Maya claiming her identity, one strand of color at a time. And though it wasn't easy, they began to support her in their own way, because if there was one thing they could agree on, it was that Maya was finally standing tall in a world that often tried to make her small. It didn't take long for Maya to realize that her rainbow-colored hair was more than just a personal statement, it was a magnet. Whether she was walking down the street, browsing through aisles at the grocery store, or sitting quietly on the bus, her presence seemed to demand attention. The world, it seemed, had an opinion about her, and it wasn't shy about expressing it. The first moment came at the corner store. Maya was reaching for a carton of milk when an older man beside her let out a low chuckle. Trying to be a walking Skittles commercial, huh? He said, gesturing vaguely toward her head. Maya froze for a second, the carton clutched in her hand. She turned to face him, forcing a polite smile. Something like that, she replied, her tone neutral. The man grunted and moved on, but the encounter left her stomach in knots. Was this what it would be like everywhere she went? At the checkout counter, the cashier, a woman in her 20s with streaks of blue in her own hair, smiled warmly. I love your hair, she said. It's so bold. I wish I had the guts to do something like that. Maya's shoulders relaxed. Thanks, she said, her voice more genuine this time. The compliment carried her through the rest of the errand, a small reminder that not every interaction would leave her feeling exposed. But the awkwardness seemed to follow her wherever she went. On the bus ride home, she sat near the window, trying to blend into the background. A group of middle-aged women sitting across the aisle, however, had other plans. Kids these days, one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. Always looking for attention. Exactly, another chimed in. It's like they're screaming, look at me. Maya kept her gaze fixed on the passing buildings, her face carefully blank. But her hands gripped her bag tightly, her knuckles white. Then, a younger man sitting a few seats away leaned over and said quietly, don't listen to them. Your hair's awesome. Maya turned to him, surprised, and managed a small smile. Thanks, she whispered. It was a pattern that began to emerge. For every unsolicited comment that felt like a jab, there was a compliment that softened the sting. But the unpredictability of it all kept her on edge. One day, as she was crossing the street, a woman stopped her mid-step. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp. Why would you do that to your hair? It's so unnatural. You'd be so much prettier without it. Maya blinked, momentarily stunned by the boldness of the remark. Then, with a steady breath, she replied, I think I'm beautiful just the way I am. Thanks for your input, though. The woman huffed and walked away, but Maya felt a strange sense of triumph. She had stood her ground, and that mattered. It wasn't all criticism, though. Some encounters were downright heartwarming. A little boy at the park pointed at her and gasped, Mom! Look! It's a real-life unicorn. His mother laughed and apologized, but Maya just grinned. I'll take it, she said with a wink, and the boy beamed. These moments began to teach Maya something important: people would always have opinions. Some would misunderstand her, judge her, or project their own insecurities onto her. But others would see her for who she truly was, bold, creative, and unafraid to stand out. Each awkward moment became a small lesson in resilience. The more she encountered, the more she realized that the way people reacted to her hair said more about them than it did about her. By the end of the week, she found herself walking a little taller, her head held high. Her rainbow-colored hair wasn't just a conversation starter, it was a challenge, a test of her ability to rise above the noise. And with every awkward glance, every unsolicited comment, she was learning how to color the world around her in her own terms. It happened when Maya least expected it. After days of navigating stares, whispers, and unsolicited opinions, she began to believe she'd have to face the world alone. But that was before she walked into the art room one afternoon. The art room was her escape, a quiet space filled with the faint smell of paint and the hum of creativity. Maya didn't consider herself an artist, but she loved the atmosphere. It was a place where people could express themselves without judgment, or so she hoped. She was flipping through a sketch pad when she heard a voice behind her. Your hair looks like a sunset. Maya turned to see a girl about her age, her hands smudged with charcoal. She had short, choppy hair dyed in streaks of pink and blue, and her smile was warm, almost disarming. Thanks, Maya said cautiously. I'm Jess, the girl said, extending a hand. Your hair is awesome. Seriously. Maya hesitated, then shook her hand. I'm Maya. Before long, they were sitting at a table together, Jess sketching while Maya doodled aimlessly on a scrap of paper. Jess talked animatedly about how she had dyed her own hair to rebel against a strict dress code at her old school. They said I couldn't have blue hair, she said with a grin, so I went all in. Blue, pink, purple, it was glorious chaos. Maya laughed, feeling the tension of the past few days begin to ease. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. Over the next week, Jess introduced Maya to a small but vibrant group of friends from the art club. There was Leo, who always wore mismatched socks and painted abstract masterpieces, and Danny, whose sketchbooks were filled with intricate, dreamlike designs. They welcomed Maya with open arms, showering her with compliments and asking about the inspiration behind her rainbow hair. It's not just about the look, Maya explained one afternoon as they sat cross-legged on the grass outside school. It's about feeling free. I got tired of trying to fit into this mold that everyone else expects. I wanted to show the world who I really am. Leo nodded thoughtfully, his fingers stained with green paint. It's like your hair is your canvas, he said. You're telling your story without saying a word. That's deep, Leo, Jess teased, tossing a crumpled napkin at him. No, seriously, Leo insisted, brushing the napkin aside. It's brave. Most people would never take that risk. Their words stayed with Maya. For the first time, she felt seen, not as an object of curiosity or judgment, but as a person with a voice and a story worth sharing. One day after school, Danny handed Maya a small notebook. For you, she said shyly. Maya flipped through it and realized it was a collection of sketches, all inspired by her. There were drawings of her hair blending into sunsets, streaks of color weaving through storm clouds, and vibrant rainbows stretching across cityscapes. I hope it's okay, Danny said quickly. Your hair, it's just, inspiring. Maya's throat tightened. It's more than okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Their support gave Maya a confidence she hadn't known she needed. When the whispers and stares returned, she found herself brushing them off more easily. She had allies now, people who not only accepted her but celebrated her for who she was. With their encouragement, Maya began to push herself even further. She joined the art club officially, despite her insecurities about not being artistic enough. She started speaking up more in class, unafraid to let her voice be heard. Her new friends became her anchor, a reminder that even in a world full of judgment, there would always be those who saw the beauty in her boldness. For the first time, Maya felt like she belonged, not because she was trying to fit in, but because she had finally found people who valued her for standing out. Maya hadn't intended for her hair to mean anything to anyone but herself. When she first dyed it, it was a personal declaration, a way to break free from the gray confines of conformity. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to notice something extraordinary. Her hair wasn't just her statement anymore, it was starting to resonate with others. It began subtly. One morning, as she walked to school, a barista at the local cafe leaned out of the drive-through window. Your hair makes my day every time you walk by, she said with a grin. Maya, caught off guard, managed a shy thank you before hurrying along. Then came the notes. Little slips of paper tucked into her locker or left on her desk in class. I wish I had your courage. You're proof that it's okay to be different. Thank you for being unapologetically you. Each message felt like a spark, igniting a new sense of purpose in Maya. She began to see her hair not as just a choice but as a symbol, of individuality, of freedom, of defying expectations. One day after school, as Maya walked through the park, she noticed a group of middle school kids sitting on the swings. A girl with short, dark hair ran up to her, breathless. Excuse me, the girl said, her voice wavering with excitement. I just wanted to say, your hair is so cool. I've been thinking about dyeing mine purple, but I'm scared what people will say. Maya crouched slightly to meet the girl's gaze. It's scary at first, she admitted, but if it makes you happy, it's worth it. You don't need anyone's permission to be yourself. The girl's face lit up, and she ran back to her friends, her excitement infectious. Maya stood there for a moment, watching them, a realization settling over her, she was becoming someone others looked up to. At school, her classmates began to approach her in quiet moments. A boy from her chemistry class stopped her in the hallway to confess that he'd always wanted to wear nail polish but worried what people would think. Do it, Maya said simply. If it makes you feel like you, then who cares what they think? By now, Maya had started seeing her hair as more than just an aesthetic choice. It was a challenge to the world's unspoken rules, a declaration that she wouldn't fit into a mold that wasn't made for her. During a history class discussion about societal norms, Maya surprised even herself by raising her hand. Why do we care so much about being normal? She asked. Who decides what's normal, anyway? Isn't it better to just be ourselves? Her classmates stared at her, some nodding, others pondering her words. It was the first time Maya felt like her voice truly mattered. The moment that solidified it came during a school assembly. A teacher had organized a student-led panel on self-expression, and Maya's name had been suggested as a speaker. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her thing. But Jess, Leo, and Danny convinced her otherwise. "You've already inspired people without saying a word," Jess said. "Imagine what you could do if you told your story." Standing on the stage, her rainbow hair catching the light, Maya took a deep breath and began. "When I dyed my hair, I thought it was just for me," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't expect it to mean anything to anyone else. But over the past few weeks, I've learned that being yourself, really being yourself, can give others permission to do the same." She glanced out at the audience, seeing nods and encouraging smiles. It's scary to stand out, but it's scarier to spend your life hiding who you are. My hair isn't just hair anymore. It's a way of saying, I'm here, and I'm not afraid to be seen. The applause was louder than she expected, and as she stepped off the stage, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She wasn't just a girl with rainbow hair. She was a symbol of something bigger, of individuality, of bravery, and of the power to inspire others to embrace their true selves. Her hair had become a story, and she was proud of the one it told. Maya was flipping through her sketchbook in the art room when Jess burst in, nearly tripping over her untied shoelaces. "Maya," she exclaimed, her voice breathless with excitement. "You're not gonna believe this." Maya raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Jess held up her phone, its screen glowing with an email. "A journalist wants to interview you. About your hair. About everything." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What? Why me?" Jess rolled her eyes, dropping into the chair beside her. "Are you kidding? You're the rainbow-haired girl who's got half the school rethinking what it means to be themselves. Of course they want to talk to you." The journalist, a young woman named Talia who wrote for a local online magazine, had noticed Maya's story during the recent school assembly. Talia's email was enthusiastic and warm, describing how Maya's words had resonated with her and others in the audience. "Your story is exactly what people need to hear right now," it read. The following weekend, Maya met Talia at a cozy cafe downtown. She was nervous, tugging at the sleeve of her hoodie as she waited. Her hair, freshly styled, spilled over her shoulders in a cascade of colors that caught the morning light. Talia arrived with a notebook and a genuine smile. "Maya," she said, extending a hand, "it's so great to meet you. Thank you for agreeing to this." Maya shook her hand and nodded. "Thanks for thinking my story is worth telling." They ordered drinks and settled into a quiet corner, where Talia flipped open her notebook. "So," she began, "let's start with the big question. What inspired you to dye your hair in the first place?" Maya took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I guess it started with feeling invisible," she admitted. "I spent so much of my life trying to blend in, trying not to be noticed. But it wasn't who I was inside. I wanted to show the world that I wasn't afraid to stand out anymore." Talia nodded, scribbling notes as Maya continued. She spoke about the stares, the whispers, the unsolicited comments, and the way those moments had tested her resilience. "But it wasn't all bad," Maya added, a small smile tugging at her lips. "For every person who judged me, there were others who supported me. People who told me I inspired them to be braver, to express themselves. That's when I realized it wasn't just about my hair anymore. It was about showing others that it's okay to be different." Talia's pen paused. "You mentioned the support you've received. Can you tell me about one moment that really stuck with you?" Maya thought for a moment, then nodded. "There was this little girl in the park," she said. "She came up to me and said she thought my hair made me look like a unicorn. She was so excited, and it reminded me of how kids don't see limits the way adults do. To her, my hair wasn't weird, it was magical. That moment made me realize that standing out could be something beautiful. As the interview continued, Maya found herself growing more comfortable. Talia's questions were thoughtful, and her genuine interest made it easier to open up. Toward the end, Talia leaned forward, her eyes bright. If you could share one message with people who are afraid to be themselves, what would it be? Maya didn't hesitate. I'd tell them that the world will always have something to say, no matter what you do. But your happiness, your peace, that's what matters. You don't need anyone's permission to be yourself. And when you stop hiding, you might just inspire someone else to do the same. Talia smiled, closing her notebook. That's powerful, Maya. Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. The article went live a week later, accompanied by a photo of Maya standing in the sunlight, her hair glowing like a prism. The headline read, "Rainbow Bold: How One Teen is Inspiring a Movement of Self-Acceptance." Maya's phone buzzed non-stop that day, messages pouring in from classmates, strangers, and even distant relatives who had stumbled upon the article. Thank you for being brave. Your story made me cry. I needed to hear this. I showed this to my daughter, she wants to dye her hair pink now. As Maya read the comments, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her story was out there, and it was making a difference. She wasn't just the girl with rainbow hair anymore. She was a symbol of courage, individuality, and the beauty of embracing who you truly are. And for the first time, Maya realized that her voice, and her colors, had the power to change the world, one story at a time. It started with a single email, its subject line simple, "Thank you." Maya opened it on a quiet Tuesday evening. The message was from a woman named Carla, who had read the article about Maya's story. "I've spent years hiding who I am," the email read. "Seeing your courage has made me realize it's time to stop. Thank you for reminding me that being myself is worth it." Maya stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had shared her story to help others, but she hadn't expected it to actually reach anyone beyond her small circle. Yet here it was, proof that her words, her actions, her colors, had mattered to someone. The next day, her inbox was flooded. One message came from a teenager in another state who had been too scared to come out as non-binary. "Your story gave me the push I needed to tell my parents. They didn't take it well, but for the first time, I feel free. Thank you for inspiring me to be brave." Another was from a mother whose child had begged to dye their hair after seeing Maya's photo. "At first, I said no," the mother admitted, "but then I read your story and realized I was teaching my child to be afraid of standing out. We dyed their hair purple yesterday, and they haven't stopped smiling since." Maya read each message with a mix of amazement and gratitude. She began to reply, one by one, offering words of encouragement, sharing pieces of her journey, and sometimes simply saying, "You're not alone." At school, the shift was even more noticeable. Students who had once stared or whispered now approached her with shy smiles. "Hey, Maya," a boy she barely knew said one morning. "I've been thinking about getting a nose ring, but my parents are freaking out." "How'd you deal with it when your parents didn't like your hair?" Maya paused, taken aback by the earnestness of his question. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "But I told them why it mattered to me. Maybe if you explain how much it means to you, they'll start to understand." In art class, Jess showed her a group chat filled with students discussing Maya's story. "You're like a local celebrity," Jess teased, grinning. "Seriously, though, people are talking about this everywhere. You've started something." What surprised Maya most was the support from unexpected places. A quiet girl from her history class, someone who never spoke unless called on, left a note on Maya's desk, "Thank you for showing us it's okay to be different. I wore a dress to school today for the first time in years, and I didn't care what anyone thought." Even her teachers began to change their tone. Ms. Andrews, who had once commented on her hair as a distraction, now stopped her after class. "Maya," she said, "I just want you to know that I admire your courage. It takes a lot to stand out, and I think you're helping others more than you realize." Maya's confidence grew with every interaction. The support wasn't just louder, it was everywhere, weaving through the fabric of her daily life. And with it came a realization: her bold choice had sparked something bigger than herself. One weekend, Maya attended a community art festival with her friends from the art club. She was walking through the crowd, admiring the colorful displays, when a young girl with pastel pink hair ran up to her. "Are you the rainbow hair girl from the article?" the girl asked breathlessly. Maya laughed, nodding. "I guess I am." The girl's mother approached, smiling. "She insisted on coming today because she wanted to meet you," she said. "She's been struggling to feel confident in her own skin, but your story gave her the courage to be herself." "Thank you." Maya crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "You're already amazing just the way you are," she said softly. "Don't ever let anyone dim your colors." That night, as she sat in her room, Maya thought about how far she had come. What had started as a personal act of rebellion had grown into something much larger. Her hair had become a symbol, her story a beacon for others searching for the courage to be themselves. She wasn't just the girl with rainbow hair anymore. She was a reminder that individuality mattered, that bravery could be contagious, and that even the smallest act of self-expression could inspire a movement. The world was beginning to change, one color at a time, and Maya was ready to keep painting it brighter. Months had passed since Maya first stepped out with her rainbow-colored hair. The stares, whispers, and unsolicited opinions had faded into the background, replaced by an unspoken acceptance. Her vibrant hair no longer turned heads, instead, it had become a part of her identity, as natural as her smile or the sound of her laughter. At school, she was no longer the girl with the crazy hair. She was Maya, bold, creative, and unapologetically herself. Teachers greeted her with knowing smiles, classmates sought her out for advice, and the art room had become her second home, where she worked on colorful projects that reflected her journey. One afternoon, she stood in front of a blank canvas during art club. The sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the hues in her hair as she began to paint. Broad strokes of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet filled the canvas, weaving together into a masterpiece that felt like freedom itself. "That's incredible," Jess said, standing behind her. "It's like you've captured who you are in one painting." Maya smiled. "It's more than that," she said. "It's about showing everyone that they can be who they want to be, too." Her influence had started to grow beyond her school. She'd begun volunteering at a local community center, leading workshops on self-expression for kids and teens. They painted, wrote poetry, and explored ways to embrace their individuality. One girl, a shy 12-year-old named Sophia, hesitantly approached Maya during a workshop. "Do you think I could ever be as brave as you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Maya crouched down to her level, looking her in the eyes. "You already are," she said. "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what feels right, even when you are." Sophia smiled, her eyes lighting up with hope. Maya also found herself speaking at events, school assemblies, community gatherings, even an online forum about individuality in self-acceptance. Each time, she shared her story, the challenges she had faced, and how she had found the courage to be herself. "Self-expression isn't about fitting in or standing out," she told one audience. "It's about being true to who you are. The world needs your colors, whatever they look like." By now, Maya's hair wasn't just a bold choice, it was a symbol of the journey she had taken, and the journeys she hoped to inspire in others. She had learned that freedom wasn't about escaping judgment but about refusing to let it define her. As she walked through the town one afternoon, she noticed something remarkable. A little boy with streaks of green in his hair ran past her, giggling. A teenager with purple highlights sat on a bench, sketching. A woman with silver-dyed curls held hands with her partner, laughing as they strolled by. It hit Maya then, her colors weren't just hers anymore. They had sparked something bigger, a ripple effect that encouraged others to embrace their own brightness. That night, she sat at her desk, flipping through the messages she'd received over the past months. They were from strangers and friends alike, each one a testament to the impact she had made. Thank you for giving me the courage to be myself. Your story inspired me to stop hiding. Because of you, I finally feel free. Maya smiled, her heart full. She knew this was only the beginning. She wasn't just living her truth anymore, she was helping others find theirs. And as she ran her fingers through her rainbow-colored hair, she thought about all the colors still waiting to be added to her story. What did you think of Maya's journey? Have you ever had a moment where you chose to stand out instead of blend in? Share your story in the comments below. And if Maya's story inspired you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay connected with more stories about courage, self-expression, and the power of individuality. Let's keep spreading the colors of freedom together.